To be or not to be? All right, no, this is not Hamlet. This is lecture 2B, Southeast Asia, corresponding to pages 265 to 280 of your textbook. All right, well, Southeast Asia still feels the impact from colonial rule. Many Southeast Asian markets were dependent on European markets because of the cash crops that had been introduced by the Europeans. Today, there are many factories that produce clothing for Western clothing companies. Child labor has been an issue in many of these places. It also created a legacy of political upheaval or instability in some of these countries, in the same way that we saw former colonies in Africa once they had gained their independence. So clearly, today's lecture is going to talk more about some of the modern things happening following colonization in Southeast Asia. All right, well, a lot of it had to do, or a lot of modern Southeast Asia, there's still a legacy of this colonization, and World War II had a huge impact as well on Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia was a battleground for the War of the Pacific during World War II between Allied forces and the Japanese forces. This helped continue a push for independence following World War II. Nationalism during the late 1800s and early 1900s also is going to help to lead to this independence before and after World War II throughout Southeast Asia. However, once these nations gained independence, dictatorships often emerged. This was the case in Indonesia. In Burma, nationalists like Aung San fought for independence from the British. Aung San was later murdered, but Burma gained its independence from the British in 1948. By 1962, Burma had a dictator named General Ne Win, who established a one-party socialist state. Under Ne Win, Burma changed its name to Myanmar, which means country to or by the people. In 1990, free elections were finally held. The people voted for a democracy, but the military rejected the results and would not allow the rightfully elected politicians to take office, including Aung San's daughter named Aung San Suu Kyi. She became a noted nationalist leader and a politician in Burma during the 1980s and 1990s. Suu Kyi was placed under house arrest, where she remained for almost 25 years. Myanmar established a military state called a junta. Myanmar's government has recently opened up, allowing free elections. Suu Kyi has been allowed to take office as a politician, but it is still a somewhat totalitarian state. Suu Kyi is considered by many people to be a heroine for her efforts at securing democracy in Myanmar, although they're still not there yet. She won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1991 for her efforts. All right, well, Singapore was another nation that fell under totalitarian rule following independence in 1963 under the leadership of Lee Kuan Yew. Lee Kuan Yew was replaced by democratically elected leaders in the 1990s. Singapore has focused on trade and technical industries, leading to its designation as one of the Asian tiger countries. And they make a lot of electronics there today and trade quite a bit. All right, well, Malaya gained its independence from the British after many years of fighting in 1957. It became known then as Malaysia a few years later, 1963, when it joined with several other former colonies. So Malaysia was another country that gained its independence following World War II. All right, the nations of French Indochina also demanded independence following World War II. These included Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. Nationalist leaders like Ho Chi Minh from Vietnam demanded an end to colonial rule and demanded self-determination. Ho Chi Minh supported a communist movement in Vietnam and wanted to see a communist state established there. Ho Chi Minh established a group of fighters during World War II called the Viet Minh. They used guerrilla warfare against the Japanese during World War II, and by 1945 controlled the northern portion of the country, including a northern city called Hanoi. The Vietnamese declared themselves independent under the Viet Minh in 1945. The French tried to prevent the communist takeover of their colony, and they fought against the Viet Minh for 8 years. Eventually, the French withdrew from Vietnam in 1954, and then later from Cambodia and Laos. French Indochina was no more. However, It became a battleground for the superpowers during the ensuing Cold War period. In class, we learned on our crash course day on Vietnam before the field trip that, well, at least in 2014, didn't happen. Anyway, we learned all about how Vietnam was temporarily divided in 1954 into two separate nations at the 17th parallel. So they were divided along the 17th parallel and were really two separate nations at that point. There was a northern portion of Vietnam controlled by the communists and a southern portion controlled by a non-communist government led by a man named Ngo Dinh Diem. The communists eventually invaded the South in the early 1960s, and Vietnam became a proxy war during the Cold War period, or a surrogate substitute nation where the superpowers got involved. The U.S. was afraid of other nations falling to communism in Southeast Asia, and this was a trend that they referred to as the domino theory. You know, one by one the nations fall to communism, domino theory. And so they involved themselves in this proxy war. This became known as the Vietnam War. During this conflict, U.S. forces battled the North Vietnamese, who were called the Viet Cong, from 1964 to 1975, at which time Vietnam became a communist nation. The Vietnam War greatly affected surrounding nations, especially Laos and Cambodia. Viet Cong forces had often fled and hid into or in Laos and Cambodia during the Vietnam War. This led to massive bombing efforts by the Americans in those countries, which was at first denied by the United States. The movie we will watch beginning this week is called The Killing Fields, and it shows the effects of these bombing runs on the Cambodian people. Thousands of Cambodian civilians were killed because of American bombing efforts during the Vietnam War. To compound matters following the Vietnam War, a communist group in Cambodia called the Khmer Rouge will take over. The Khmer Rouge, led by a man named Pol Pot, renamed the country to Kampuchea, Cambodia's ancient name, remember? They declared all Western influences illegal and started at the year 0 when they took over. The Khmer Rouge conducted a forced exodus or mass movement of people to the Cambodian countryside. People were forced to become farmers and rid themselves of all Western influence. Cambodia's former leaders and royal family members, many were executed during this time. Professionals and all Western-educated people were rounded up and murdered. This resulted in a mass genocide. In 1979, Vietnam invaded Cambodia and overthrew Pol Pot. The Vietnamese remained in partial control of Cambodia until 1989. Free elections were held in 1991, but the Khmer Rouge, under Pol Pot, continued to insist that they were the rightful leaders of Cambodia and had insisted this from a base that they occupied near Thailand from 1979 all the way to 1997. They were not put on trial for crimes against humanity, which many people felt and still feel is abhorrent. Free elections were finally held in 1991. Pol Pot was placed under house arrest in 1997, and he committed suicide in 1998. The Khmer Rouge left behind a tragic legacy in Cambodia, from which it is still recovering even today. It seems clear from today's lecture that Southeast Asia has gone from colonial rule to independence following World War II, often at a great price. Thanks for listening. Bye.